Okay, so in this video we are going to look at a plinth detail, a foundation detail, specifically in a masonry construction. And I just want to quickly preface this by saying that any of those detail explanation videos that I'm uploading, there are always multiple ways in how you can solve these sort of little moments within your construction. And while there are rights and wrongs in how to do this, don't think that the examples that I'm showing are the only way of how things are being done. And some of the examples are also a little bit outdated, the kind of drawings. There might be different ways of how we do it now. So keep in mind there are regional and local differences in how things are being done as well. So in your country you might be using different techniques, different materials, of course, and some of them might not even be applicable or available for you as well. So this is really important to know. My goal with these videos is really about explaining to you or helping you to understand why things are constructed or shown in the way that they are, so that you can understand the principle and the logic behind it and kind of what sort of things to look out for, because eventually every single detail is going to look a little bit different. So hopefully you will gain that kind of experience and knowledge that you know, why am I placing this particular element or part in this place as I'm doing it now. So hopefully the video is going to be helpful. Any comments, any suggestions, just let me know. So today we are looking at a foundation detail of a single stone masonry construction. We are not going to look at all the way the bottom bits of the foundation. This is very interesting as well, but I'll leave that to another video, but we'll rather zoom in onto that top bit. So what I normally do in the beginning when I'm trying to orient myself and put that detail into its context and understand what we're actually seeing, it's really helpful to have a detail that has some sort of a description of the different layers, as we can see all over here. Sometimes you have little annotations like these ones. So that's really helpful to really just go through and have a look at it. And let me reiterate that as well. No one, absolutely no one, just looks at a detail and they're like, oh, okay, I got it. It takes time. It's almost like reading a text. You have to read and understand and sort of think through how the detail has been constructed. Of course, with time and experience, you get much better at it, but nonetheless, it takes time. So just to have a look, just to orient ourselves, we have the outside on this side and inside over here. The soil, the ground, all the way over here. There's some gravel, there's some sand, and we have some sort of paving, so maybe some concrete tiles or something that are here, and then we look onto the facade on this side. What we can see, which is quite important for this particular detail, is that we have a different material on the bottom part than we have on the top. So we can see some sort of exposed or potentially painted concrete, this slab here, and then on the top we have the actual detail construction, which over here we can see it says there is a render on the outside, which is roughly 35 millimeters in width. We have a single leaf masonry layer and then a plaster on the inside. The inside as well, just if you have a close look, this upper bit would be probably some sort of a room, and it's particularly on a warm inside and interior, so it would be heated. We can actually see that in the floor slab there is some underfloor heating, and we have some insulation. So the insulating layer is usually the part that gives away which parts will be warm. That means which parts will be heated or in some sort of way climate controlled, as opposed to that bottom bit down here. This would be some sort of a basement or maybe an underground garage, because all we can see is there is simply just the concrete layer. We have no insulation layer, so that sort of indicates that we do not have, or we should not have, any sort of heating, because that would be really, really bad. If you're heating something that has no insulation, that is a lot of waste of energy that goes into that. Okay, as I mentioned before, what is quite interesting is that we have this sort of change of materiality on that foundation detail here, that we have some sort of concrete on the bottom and the plaster on the top. So why do we do this? Is that simply an aesthetic consideration, or is there some functionality behind it? And what is really important to understand in this point again, and I can't stress this enough, but construction details in architecture and construction in general are almost always about water management of any sort. It is about vapor transmission, about condensation, about managing rainwater or any kind of water that's coming from the outside, making sure that your construction stays dry, because any kind of water that permeates or penetrates your construction means there will be some sort of damage due to rotting materials, or some materials may become inefficient, and particularly insulation layers that get wet are not efficient in doing their job anymore. So in this particular case, if you think about rainwater that's coming down and it splashes onto these concrete tiles, and you'll always have a little bit of splashback here. Any kind of rain gets onto that facade. So that means that bottom bit here might potentially always be a little bit wet or humid or moist from that kind of rainwater. It's also about water from the soil that's just stored in it that can kind of seep up a bit, and it's like these capillary effects that we have in certain materials. So your construction could actually get a bit soaked up down there. And the plaster particularly is a protective layer, of course, but it won't be 100% waterproof. And this single layer of masonry, if you think about a brick, any type of brick, they're always slightly porous. So if they are constantly in a wet environment, they would soak up some of that water and it will store in here. And what happens when we have water, especially in a cold climate where you have a climate where you freezing snow and ice and all of that can occur. If you have water in your bricks that's stored in it, and the temperature outside here changes and it drops below 0 degrees Celsius, so it starts to freeze. And as we know from chemistry or physics, ice has more volume than normal water. So this water in here will then start to expand because it takes up more space. And if your brick is not able, all these like little holes and pores, that porosity in that brick is not able to hold that extra volume, it means it can start to break off. So you can start to lose some of your material, your plaster may break up, and that's obviously an issue. Your construction is not going to be collapsing in an instant, but over time, of course, that's an issue that we don't want. So this is why it's very important to have a proper water management sort of approach for protecting that brick up here. So in this particular detail, they made that little trick of extending the concrete slab or the concrete wall from the bottom, extending it up a little bit, just keeping it small. It doesn't need to have the same dimension as we have at the basement on below the wall, because it's not carrying as much weight and loads as this wall would be carrying down here. And then it gives us a chance to have what they call a leveling unit. On the one hand, that's another piece of brick, as we can see down here. It's probably specifically manufactured in that way. Ideally, if you know the specifications and requirements of the brick, of the manufacturer of these kind of bricks, they probably have a standard item, a unit that they can use down here. One thing that I didn't mention at the beginning is what's quite interesting about this detail is that we can't see any insulation layer in the wall above here. We only have the plaster and the render plaster on the inside, render on the outside, and the bricks themselves. So I am assuming that this single leaf masonry is probably one of those special insulated sort of bricks. So these kind of bricks will have a filling, sort of an insulating filling inside them. So they will perform as the load-bearing layer and the insulation layer at the same time. The insulation may not be as efficient as another type of insulation that we would normally use. It's not the kind of, it doesn't have the kind of density and all the material properties with another insulation. So what that usually means is that the thermal requirements are usually determined by the dimension of those bricks. So in this case, the width. So that needs to be a certain width, and it's not the loads that are the kind of the weight that's on these bricks that is determining that width, but it's probably the insulating requirements that will determine how thick your wall is going to be. And so when you look at that leveling unit down here again, obviously we have a slightly reduced width of that element. The concrete is not going to do a lot of insulation, and in order to avoid having, let me show you here the different color, having some sort of a thermal bridge, meaning that the outside temperature and the inside temperature will have too much of a difference that cannot be managed by this part, we will need to have a little bit of extra help in the form of some kind of insulation. This little bit will help to improve the thermal transmission in this kind of layer, and it will also help us to sort of figure out if there's any tolerance or any gaps in it, anything between the concrete and between the leveling unit. So this is a really this layer does a lot of different kind of functions in that sense. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about thermal bridge in a different videos, but this is always the most important bit. So once again, when we look at the insulation layer, this is the insulation on the bottom, this little bit plus the insulating brick, and then we have the actual insulating masonry up here. So this is all the insulating layer, and again we have the inside here, which is warm, and this is the inside, which is cold. It's unheated, and this is all the outside. Okay, so some more detailing again when I was talking about waterproofing and making sure that the water management is all clear. We can see a little bit of a how do they call it, a separating layer or a bitumen layer here as well, just making sure that with these kind of gaps and joints none of the water can actually seep through. And what I'd also like to mention is that there's, as I said, there's always different ways of constructing these. Let's assume we don't like to see that bottom bit here, that exposed concrete. What other options do we have? And maybe next time you go on a walk, have a look at some of the buildings and some of the examples that you can see. Because the most obvious way, of course, is to say, well, we'll just grab that whole thing and we'll save all that complicated stuff here and we'll just put it on the bottom. Why doesn't that work? Why can't I have the render all the way down here? And yes, as I said earlier, it's about protection from rainwater. But there are other options as well. You could have that render coming all the way down here, and then you could have a little like a metal skirting or something. That's what you see quite often as well. So then you will have this little piece of metal. Now we'll have red rain, that's all right. So when the rain is gonna splash up here, the metal will take that kind of protective part of it. You will need to seal it off up here, so none of the rainwater can actually seep in between the metal and the render really bad, and you end up having a lot of water that's going to be trapped behind that metal. We don't want that either. And of course there's certain detailing that will be required to make sure that this bit here works as well. That's another option. That's another visual kind of aesthetic look for it as well. But yeah, as I said, different ways, different construction details can lead to the same or like similar kind of outcomes. Awesome. I hope that the video was helpful for you in understanding those construction details. If there are any comments or suggestions from your side, particularly if there's a specific type of construction or a detail that you're struggling with all the time and you need some additional explanation, let me know. So hopefully I can address that in some of the future videos as well. In the next one, we're going to be looking at a slightly more complicated or more complex masonry detail as well. So as soon as that's going to be available, I'm going to link it up on the top. It'll be a facing masonry detail, so we will have a facade where the bricks, so the masonry is going to be visible. So keep an eye out for that one in the next video. Thank you.